So Richard's going to talk to us, from what I understand, a bit more about the hemp laws. He's really focusing on the national hemp picture. He's the chairperson, of New Zealand Industrial Hemp Association, and he runs Hemptastic New Zealand, a company that's been striving since 1997 to establish bioregional development centered around the sustainable production of seed and natural fiber crops that are grown and processed locally. And he's also part of Hemp Seed Foods Limited, that's been around since 2005. Richard is currently touring New Zealand and joining us on Zoom today. Welcome, Richard. Hello. Can you hear us?
Hi, yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me okay?
We got you. Thank you, Richard. Go ahead. Oh, 20 minutes. 20 minutes.
Okay, so I'll just get started in regard to the presentation. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share the news about the industrial hemp industry and the emerging opportunities and potential that it creates. And thank you to the organisers for having me along. So great to be there in virtual sense. Looking forward to coming down to see you possibly over the summer and really meet everybody again then. I'm not sure how far I know how far we'll get to the end of the slides, but I'll be pretty quick in the sense that some of these slides are a little bit of a background information, and it's a bit of a homage to the past that I thought I'd start with, and that will give you an idea of where the future might lead. So in the sense of the New Zealand Hemp Industries Association, we were established in 1997 by a guy called Mac McIntosh, who lives down in the Catlins Valley. And I came back from an overseas trip and joined the association in 98. At the time, there was a moratorium on talking about cannabis with the government, so we had to create the 5-minute guide to industrial hemp and send a copy to all the MPs to raise their awareness and allow the trials to begin in 2000, and they went through from 2000 to 2005. The document on the right is our AgMart-funded investor report that we did in 2021, written by Dr. Nick Marsh, and it just sort of goes to show, where we've come from in 20 years. We're getting ready for this incredible potential coming forward, and after such a long time of being involved in the industry, it's great to see that the people are now more open to the idea of industrial hemp and willing to work with us to get things moving. Witness, how many people are at your hui this morning. I'll leave that picture in there just to show the differences between the long, tall plant that would be for fibre and the shorter plant for that horticultural and seed industry. And it gives you an idea of the different types of harvesting that you might have to undertake to get to the parts of the plant that you want to use in your production process. Again, just a nod to the background in the history. 100 years ago, this is what we were sort of doing. A little bit longer probably for the sailboats, but it's interesting to note how many tonnage of hemp would be on board, not just in the rope and the sails, but also in the uniforms, the paper that they wrote on, and their maps, and the oils in their quills and things like that. So it's quite a variety. Again, looking back, you'll probably recognise some of these brand names: Park Davis, Aloe Lily. It was one of the most popular medical preparations in the American pharmacopoeia up until the early 1900s. So again, it just speaks to the fact that we've had a long and useful history and association with industrial hemp that's gone back for millennia. We're just touching on the things that were happening up to 100 years ago. From there, we had, it was an exciting time back in the early 1900s when a thing called Commergy was around, where we were looking at using industrial waste products and raw materials to make plastics and other forms of chemicals. And you might recognise the chap on the right, that's Henry Ford, knocking his hemp and soya-based car with a sledgehammer and watching the panels bounce back. And again, just a homage to George Washington Carver, who was involved in the setting up of the Commergy sort of approach to using renewable resources such as hemp and other agricultural products. I just wanted to show you these couple of screens because the $1 billion crop article in the middle, that was a celebration of a decortication machine that was developed by G.W. Shetland in 1917. That $1 billion crop article was issued in 1938, and it celebrates the 25,000 constructive uses for hemp. So that's where that quote comes from, everything from dynamite to cellophane. The article on the left is hemp herds as a paper-making material. This is where it was documented in Bulletin 404 by the United States Department of Agriculture that hemp could produce 4 times as much pulp as wood could produce. So again, that's where those sort of quotes come from. Of course, in 1937, it all stopped with the Marijuana Tax Act, and reefer madness began, and it spread like wildfire throughout the world, and we'll come to the conclusion of that in a moment. Although in saying that, in 1945, everything was reversed. You guys are probably aware of the Hemp for Victory newsreel that encouraged every patriotic American farmer to grow 1 acre of hemp. These are the soldiers protecting the seed for that crop. What people possibly don't know is that the Germans had a humorous hemp primer that promoted the same thing, and it used a boy and a girl for the male and female parts of the plant to promote the same need to grow industrial hemp for fibre for cordage and webbing for the war efforts. Of course, after that, it all went back to being demonised again, resulting in the 1961 narcotics Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs signed by the UN signatories. But it's worthwhile pointing out that Article 28.2 shows that they were considering that lots of cultures already had an ongoing and an enduring relationship with industrial hemp, such that this convention shall not apply to the cultivation of the cannabis plant exclusively for industrial purposes, fibre and seed, or horticultural purposes. So that's what gave us the opportunity to really open the dialogue with the Ministry of Health and get the hemp trials underway, resulting in the 2006 industrial hemp regulations, whose objective is to enable the cultivation and distribution of industrial hemp under a licensing regime that ensures that other forms of cannabis are not cultivated and distributed under the guise of industrial hemp. So from that, there's 2 points to note. It's enabling legislation. You know, the government via the Ministry of Health should be enabling the industry. It's questionable if they actually are at the moment, but that's an interpretation. They have their version, and of course, industrial participants have a wider version that would actually enable the industry. So we've got to try and join those two perspectives together a little bit more in the coming short period of time. But also, it suggests that the problem is THC as a psychotropic drug. In which we have very little of. So therefore, we shouldn't be controlled as a drug crop. We should be left to develop as an arable and horticultural industry. Now, just a little bit more on the hemp regulations, because they do contain a number of definitions, and industrial hemp is the key definition here on the right. It means that it's a low THC plant, generally below 0.35% THC. So very, very minimal THC. None of it is of interest to the recreation or high THC medicinal cannabis user. What this legislation creates is a nice little circle of, a closed circle, in fact, of protection for the hemp industry, because only industrial hemp can be grown under a license issued by the Ministry of Health, and only industrial hemp can be made into a hemp product. So you need a license to grow industrial hemp or possess the seeds, but as soon as it becomes a hemp product, or a hemp seed food product in this case, it's available for use by all people without having to have a license to be in possession of it. So that's the closed system. MOH, Ministry of Health, via Medicines Control, issue the licenses. So only licensed people can grow industrial hemp, low THC industrial hemp, and only that can be made into hemp products. So it's a lovely piece of 30 odd pages of regulations that really could enable our industry. And because it's a regulation, it has to sit under the Misuse of Drugs Act, and that's how we get into the Ministry of Health. And it's always a problem then, because they are the health police and looking from a safety point of view, and they know all about pharma, but they don't necessarily know about farming. So a lot of education there to be done. In the 5-minute guide that I mentioned earlier, this was inside the cover, just giving you an idea of all those uses. We'll touch on them a little bit in the coming slides. But these slides are just so powerful to explain the diversity of end users, which is both a real opportunity, but a bit of a problem, because where do you start is often the question. So why hemp? Why would we be wanting to do this in New Zealand? And this is what we're doing on the iHemp Discovery and Investment Tour, is raising that awareness to try and spread the word around the exciting potential and opportunities to regenerate regional New Zealand. It's not so much about the growers in the sense that if you provide a return for a farmer, they will be happy to grow the crop for you. It's a lot of it's about the end users and the manufacturers and processors that are going to create the demand. We need those people in the room to have the light bulb moment to really turn them on to the idea that they could use industrial hemp fibre or seed in their manufacturing processes. So we need to get them involved in this industry to really help scale up and match this demand and supply. So just celebrating a organic, in this case, hemp field. You can see some of the male plants and the female plants, and there's no problem with growing it organically. Clearly, that's quite a that fence isn't shrunk. That's relative. Reflective of the height of this plant in 2018. Thank you, Bill Quinn, for the photo. Just a bit of a tangent here, because regenerative is being used a lot in all sorts of ways. Fit for a Better World, of course, is the Ministry of Primary Industries tagline. I just wanted to note that regenerative, in the case of Fit for a Better World, does allow for the use of Roundup, glyphosate, sorry about the pronunciation, mixed with the fish fulvic acid and to reduce the rate in direct drill. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, it's organic is out there already, quite well established. Regenerative, we all want it to be exactly what it says on the can, but there is a couple of fish hooks in there as well around using Roundup as part of that regenerative approach. So something to consider. I just wanted to make you aware. So sorry for the tangent there. Back to hemp fields. Again, a lovely field here. This is a crop of finola. This is James and his family from Tirau, and that was one of the first crops, a seed crop, to be grown in the North Island in the Waikato. And he had, although some fields didn't perform as well as others, he had an astounding yield that year, and just proved that a seed crop is happily an opportunity for Waikato farmers. That said, though, given the area in Waikato, it may be more appropriate for a fibre industry. This is just a nod to because we know all about and we'll talk about it in a moment, about some of the food products, but this is just to show this cake that is the byproduct of the cold pressing process. It's a wonderful food unto itself. As you can see in the bottom pictures, it can be ground into a finer grit, but it's also, because it contains the hemp husks, I think it's a rather special food product, because it has all the great things about the hemp, and you can possess it at home, as opposed to if you wanted to possess the seeds, you would have to have a license, because under the Misuse of Drugs Act, the seeds are specifically referred to as a Class C drug. So this is the next best thing to having seeds in the cupboard would be this byproduct from the oil pressing industry. So why hemp from a farming point of view? We talk a lot about the cash crop options, and we'll touch on those products that can be produced to create that cash flow. But there's also phytoremediation, and I heard Michael just talking about Chernobyl and things. And I mean, we're talking about reclaiming and reconditioning soil. So again, more towards that regenerative, as you guys have been describing it. And if we can be lifting those heavy metals and returning that land to productive, especially food producing land, that's got to be a good thing. We're a gross nitrogen feeder, so that's obviously an advantage to us if we're working in rotation with a farming operation, particularly a milk farming operation. So it's really going to be about getting New Zealand specific research and development done to understand how it fits in with that crop rotation, what are the benefits of follow-on crop and that sort of thing. But it's those sort of things that make it very attractive as an alternate land use for our farmers. And the quicker we can get those markets established to create the demand for their product, the quicker they can start growing lots and lots of hemp. Speaking of which, this is a table of the hectares grown This is done, we do an annual Official Information Act request with the Ministry of Health to provide this information. You'll see that all the areas are actually broken down to district health boards, and the Nelson Marlborough, you've got a consistent and definitely growing in the last couple of years in your area. But the big ones are Canterbury and South Canterbury for the largest areas where hemp is grown. And it tends to run in rotation as well. Some farmers would, some manufacturing companies would have had enough seed from one season, so they would grow less in the following season. Hawke's Bay is a classic example of that. You'll notice it goes from 60 hectares down to 9, back up to 89. So just something to be aware of. We need to match that supply with the demand. Otherwise, our farmers will get burnt, and that's not a good look. And continuity of supply for some of our manufacturers is going to be paramount if they do pivot into using sustainable resources such as industrial hemp. Just to give you an idea of the value chain, so we're moving away, the word must be to move away from supply chain into value chain. This is where we're going to be able to really bring up the opportunities and add value, because we can't compete, as everybody probably would agree, on a commodity basis, but there's huge niche markets worldwide where our reputation as a food producer and our values really can be woven into a wonderful story to export our products into those global niche markets. But it does require us to all sort of work together and help us to match that supply and demand as we scale the industry. So why hemp in the food industry? You'll probably hear other speakers today talk about, and you'll be aware of, the nutritional value of seeds. Hemp seeds, the essential fatty acid ratio is in the perfect ratio of omega-3 and 6 for human use. I mean, that's how aligned we are. It's a great source of all those essential fat amino acids as well, and is a great opportunity. From an update from the industry point of view, we got the opportunity to sell hemp seed foods in 2018 for human consumption, lost animal consumption, but the human consumption market helped us to scale that industry. And there's been a new application to FSANZ, Food Safety Australia and New Zealand, to allow hemp sprouts, leaves and flowering tops to be used as a food. So that application went in at the end of last year, and it should be picked up and looked at by the end of this year. And then hopefully there'll be some consultation, and that could lead to another upgrade and improved access to the flowering tops of the plants. Because in a sense, if you've got a food, you want to be moving up to functional foods, then your natural health products, your nutraceuticals, and then of course at the other end of the spectrum is your medicines, which are governed in New Zealand by the medicinal cannabis regulations. So what we do from our point of view at the New Zealand Hemp Industries Association is we have the 4 pillars. We've done the farming side. We're looking at the food, the fibre and the health. So this is the food one. Just going back to using the graphic from the 5-minute guide, but it's also important that when you're working with the food, especially if you're making oil, the enemies of that are heat, light and air. So you've got to bear that in mind when you're consuming it, but even more importantly, when you're producing it, producing it in a dark room in the absence of heat and light are just so important. And air, of course, these all increase the peroxide value. One photon of light can destroy 30,000 molecules of hemp oil. So, you really need to pay attention to some of these best practices. What we've got here is just a bit of a quick celebration of some of our local hemp companies. Midlands in the South Island, Ashburton, Hemp Farm in Tauranga, Kanapu in Hastings, and Hemp Connect in Levin, and the Brothers Green making the Hempy Bar in Christchurch. So it's good to see that these companies are really moving forward and are still here. So that speaks to the business plans that are, can be successful in the hemp industry. Unfortunately, we do have a lot of pressure from overseas and imported hemp seed products, and we really need to get a bit of a Grow New Zealand marketing campaign there to support our local growers. Just wanted to, while we're talking about hemp seeds and we're looking at breeding, because we need people to breed the seeds that are going to make the products that meet the specification of those end users. We should celebrate Matt McIntosh again, as I mentioned, the retired chair of the NZHIA. He's got a company called Hemptastic Holdings. And this graphic on the right is the approved cultivars of industrial hemp on the Medicines or MedSafe website. And all those A1s are Max, and they all come from the breeding selection that is Aotearoa 1. So he's done extraordinarily well over the years to get to this stage, and that's a massive, the Aotearoa 1 particularly is a massive opportunity because there's so much genetic diversity in that breeder selection that you could be breeding from that source for many, many years to come. And I just wanted to pay homage to Matt because he's a great Kiwi, an awesome leader and developer of the hemp industry, along with many other great people as well. And if you wanted to know a bit more about Mac and see his colourful life in the past, Mad Mac and the Fat Ugly Snail is a Vimeo movie well worth a watch. But thank you very much, Mac. So why hemp in the fibre industry? Again, this is pretty new to New Zealand because we've only just had the first processing plant established in Christchurch at the mid last year. And that is a process that we refer to as cortication, which is the splitting up of the stems into their bast fibres, primary and secondary, on the outside of the stem, and the inner woody pith, the hurd or the shiv. And this really has been a massive boost for the industry because it's opened up the fibre side of that production chain and value chain. And because it's now got a New Zealand-based supply, some of those herds and shiv are being used in local construction projects, and you'll hear more about that this afternoon, I'm sure, as well. But it's just great that there's a supply out there now that people can hold and touch and start working with. From a fibre point of view, a lot of it's still being used as a geotextile, like a mulch mat around trees or along the side of motorways and things like that. But there's many, many other high-tech uses as well, as you'll be aware from the research you've already done, and we'll touch on a couple of those in the next slides. Again, just a celebration of that graphic from the 5-minute guide, and also an opportunity from my point of view to start using the icons that the hemp industry has been developing with regard to, from left to right, plastics, paper, fuel, construction and fuel, and the T-shirt represents the apparel or textiles. So that gives you, again, quite a wide range of commercial opportunities there, from building materials all the way through to those fiberglass and type substitutes, and the building industry is just a massive opportunity for the hemp fibre industry to really scale up, because if we could get some of those products codified and work through and being accepted in that and being able to be specified by architects, I'm sure they would love to specify them, and that will really help us to move the amount of hemp grown, and the number of decortication plants dotted around New Zealand will start to be established. Again, this is just a quick graphic on how we use the fibre in all its various forms, including the insulation block and the matting on the right. The higher end ones, we're talking about the composites now. We mentioned Henry Ford's car 100 years ago, and it's good to see that Lotus can do it this year in the current times. But also the Mercedes and other manufacturers are starting to use hemp fibre in the interior panels, because they have to look at the end of use life cycle in Europe of their product. So how that product is disposed is all part of the original thinking around how it's developed. So they're now moving away, or moving towards rather, sustainable and recyclable materials, and hemp really fits into there. It is starting to take off now. Again, it was slow to get there because we just, as an industry, even globally, we couldn't guarantee the continuity of supply that some of these large end users needed. But that supply has now increased, and now those larger end users are coming on board. The construction photo on the right, that's a house being built in New Plymouth about 6 or 7 years ago. And I just wanted to put this other one in on the bottom left, which is a Just Fibre bio block. And you'll notice the holes there for your electrics and things like that. And this is a Lego block. So it just speaks to a couple of different ways that hempcrete can be used in construction. And again, just another celebration, you'll see the picture of construction uses. The picture in the middle is a stem, and you'll see that inner woody pith that we referred to as the hurd or the shiv when it's chipped up, and some interesting stats on the amount of CO2 that is produced by buildings and steel and cement. In fact, way more than just cars and trucks produce globally. Now, this whole carbon sequestration is definitely a big, powerful consideration and something that we need to push forward on, because it really will help with that. Unfortunately, in the emissions trading scheme, it's all about trees and forestry rather than annual crops, but it doesn't stop us showing that if we lock up carbon in the hemp plant and use it to produce something like a building material, that CO2 will be locked in, and it will continue to sequester CO2 throughout its curing and use in the building. Some hemp wood products that doesn't require a decortication system. What they're doing there is under very high pressure, just pressing together the stem. So again, there's some things we can do without decortication as well. The fourth type of area, we used to say food, fibre and medicine, but with the medicinal cannabis regulations in place now, we refer to health, because that health and wellness industry we feel is just a massive opportunity for us. But it would require us to be growing female plants. And now we're talking about not necessarily the nutritional value of hemp seeds, but the cannabinoids, flavonoids, and terpenes that are available in out of the flowering heads and the leaves that would create just a massive opportunity for New Zealand, and particularly you guys in the Nelson area. You've got a good infrastructure there with Cawthron and some good support, critical CO2 extraction and all this sort of thing to support the development of a high value nutraceutical sort of type product. The next one is, so what's the NZHIA's why? I forgot an I there, so my apologies for that. The New Zealand Export Driven Investor Report refers to a potential industry by 2030 of some $2 billion. And we've got the seeds and the fibre sort of underway, so we're working on that prediction towards it, but it would take some tweaking to the regulatory environment for that nutraceuticals to really build. Because THC is a controlled drug under the Misuse of Drugs Act and CBD is a prescribed medicine under the Medicines Act. So we've got to deal with those two acts, which is a bit of a problem. But once people realise that the potential and the export potential and the opportunity for the government to achieve their export goals, their CO2 emissions goals and things like that, then hopefully we'll be able to find that champion in the government that can help us move forward. We had those champions in 2000 when we got the trials underway, but it doesn't seem that they're quite the same level of, pedigree of politician these days that were willing to back an idea and really put it to the test, like we had with Rod Donald and Nat King as a couple of examples. But there is, and I should acknowledge, a SAPIA report that MPI did last year and released in June. They gave a prediction of somewhere between 11 to 774 million by 2030. They went with their scenario 2, which our target now is the 30 million by 2030. But of course, as I've described, if we had a regulatory environment to really enable the industry, then we could be on track for that $2 billion number in quite a short number of years. Coming soon, we'll be launching our Aotearoa New Zealand Hemp Alliance portal, which will be a call to action after the tour is finished to try and build this community by sharing a lot of information in an online sense and trying to get people to, trying to speed up their journey into the hemp industry by helping them to join up and find out what's happening in their local areas, or find out what's happening in an area that they're particularly interested with. It could be that we record a meeting that we're doing at Massey next week. We've got Jim Jones talking about biochar, and suddenly, we're getting industry interested in fuel uses, which would be another great way to scale the industry. And then we can put them in touch with Jim, and that puts the industry in touch with the R&D community, and we really get some things happening, because 90 years of prohibition means not a lot of work's been done in this space, and we've got a great R&D ecosystem that is just ready for it. The universities are joined up. the Crown Research Institute's sharing information based on hemp and cannabis. And it's a really exciting opportunity for New Zealand to really shine, because if we don't sort of grab that one by the horns and run with it, then in a few years' time, we'll be paying overseas countries for licenses to use their tech. And we could have developed that tech and be licensing it to those overseas countries, where there is a huge and growing demand. It seems that, they're ahead of us when we look at it from some points of view, and that is true, but we've got a lot to offer in that space as well, and we can soon catch up if we had that enabling viewpoint from the government. So what are the next steps and some of the resources? Well, we're working on a strategy reset. I mean, clearly we've got a branding issue with the connection to recreational use of cannabis. But also we need to, as an industry, share a bit of a vision so we can be moving together, because that will help us to have a powerful voice with the government and give us credibility. So as part of that strategy reset, a capability development program and plan is required, and we're trying to get some funding currently to put those sort of things in place over the next year. So when we have the 2023 Industrial Hemp Summit in Christchurch, we can roll out that information. On the right here is two sets of resources. Penny Corkery has got some really good fact sheets on industrial hemp, especially for Māori land users. And Callaghan Innovation has roadmaps for the seed, fibre and medicinal industries, which are well worth a look, containing lots of really valuable information. Callaghan Innovation actually has been funded by the BPA, the Bioprocessing Alliance, to do right, I've just got the message to wrap up, so I'll move on to do a study on waste streams. So we're hoping that white paper comes out to win. Anybody that joins during the tour will be in to win a prize pack, and that includes a second prize pack from Harkins Zander, their lovely products. It would be great if you guys could get involved in industrial hemp and join the association, and we can keep in touch with you and let you know how the portal goes. And I'd just like to acknowledge the AgMart for helping us fund the industrial hemp tour. Thank you very much, folks.
Okay, well, and Richard, don't go anywhere. We're going to have a group discussion now, and then be 10 minutes for you to answer some questions. Yeah, all good?
Okay.
All right, cool. Thank you. That was brilliant. That was really brilliant. All right. So in a second, while we're having, yes, give it a little. In a second, while we're in group discussions and we're writing down our questions and sharing what that brought up for us, hemp chocolate chip gluten-free vegan cookies will be served. They do have, for those of you that don't do sugar, it's organic raw cane sugar. And then the hot drink that you'll get is a maca hemp honey drink. So it's not all the way vegan. It does have honey, just so you know. All right, cool. And yes, everything today will be gluten-free. And one wee thing is you'll get your cup. Please keep your cups after so that you'll have them for the rest of the day, because there's more stuff coming. Okay, so now the option is, and preferred, that you mix it up. Like, maybe I'll forget the whole have a seat thing. Okay, we've got a lot of amazing questions. And we are going to allow a bit more time. I've taken pictures of them all and sent them through to Richard, and he's going to answer them as he sees fit. I think Richard is probably the best idea. What do you think?
Happy to do that, but they have come through in a certain order, so it's easier for me to try and keep up. But we'll be covering a lot of ground. There's some great questions there.
Okay, cool. And we'll have, last time we had 10 minutes, we'll have more like 15 this time. Yeah, and we'll see how it goes. Maybe we can find a bit more time. All right. Okay, Richard, go.
Okay, so where can we find the following insulation mat and Lego bricks The Lego bricks are actually a company in Canada, in Alberta, Just Biofibre. So they aren't available in New Zealand just yet, but I'm aware that people are starting to use more of a panel orientation for their construction side. And hopefully you'll hear about some of those implications later on this afternoon. Regarding insulation and mat, well, the insulation, you may recall in Nelson, there was a chap called Lindsay Newton from New Wool Block Insulation in the 90s that made a hemp and New Zealand wool top insulation material, and that was really well received in the marketplace. Unfortunately, Carter Holt Harvey cut the price of their pink bats and put them out of business. He won at the Monopolies and Mergers sort of commission, but unfortunately he went out of business at the time. So there's no, at the moment, supply of that insulation material, but I'm sure it'll be coming online now that we've got that decorticator. The mats, they are being produced. New Zealand Natural Fibres is the company in Christchurch that has the decortication mill. And I think there's another company that actually sells them, but New Zealand Natural Fibres is the place to first initially contact for those fibre needs. There's another question about any move from Ministry of Health to MPI. We did try that when the food law changed in 2018. The industrial hemp regulations were updated to allow us the opportunity for any ministry to administer the regulations. We obviously wanted MPI or possibly MBIE to look at that administration. We followed down a whole path with MPI, and at the end they said, well, we would love to do it, but because we would still have to refer back to MOH because the regulations sit under the Misuse of Drugs Act, then we can't possibly do that because we'd always be running back to MOH to seek approval for various things. So it didn't make a move then, but we are hoping, as was the intention when the regulations were put in place in 2006, that they would be reviewed within 10 years and be moved to MPI. So that 10-year review is well overdue, and so we'll be bringing that up in the next Industrial Hemp Liaison Group meeting, which is scheduled for the 9th of August. And it's been a while since we've met as the Industry Liaison Group, which is a group of government officials and industry. And so we'll follow that up with another meeting on the 25th. So the first one on the 9th would be to sort of catch up where we're at, highlight the issues, and then try and move the issues forward with some definite action plans on the 25th. So still some chance there that we can get a little bit easier administration of our regulations by having it in an appropriate ministry. How do you become a grower? That's a pretty straightforward process to get a license. They're available on the Ministry of Health website. If you type in industrial hemp, you'll get to their licensing page. It's quite a straightforward process of filling out an application. You will have to have a responsible person that will have to have a police check. And as long as you don't have any major convictions for drugs or dishonesty offences, it shouldn't be an issue. The licenses cost $511, including GST, and can last for up to 3 years. So it's pretty economic, and so it's not a huge barrier to getting involved. How can you become an active advocate and spread the word? Well, you guys are already sitting in the room doing just that. So well done, everybody. And I think, as individuals, consuming hemp foods, wearing hemp clothes, making a demand, speaking to your local MP, telling them that the industrial hemp industry is a good thing for your region. These are all great things that you can do and don't cost a lot of money. The one about the supporting the politician. Supporting industry by consuming the product is a great way to go. But also, register your own products and start playing around and making some things. Get involved with building materials and building projects locally and sharing that, that social license to encourage the hemp industry. An example of potential R&D that does not already exist, that is the biggest question. It's a great question. It's all out there. It's just in front of us. We need R&D on everything from being on farm and how it fits in rotation, all the way through to the new product development, especially those high-tech uses for the fibre and composites. We don't have a big automotive industry here, but we do have yachting. There's a fair few coach builders and lots of people with kitchens that would love cabinetry made of sustainable raw materials. So how can we reconstitute? How can we develop the decortication system, for example? I mean, at the moment, it's a lot of hammer action, which is fine for some of the applications where it'll be going to. But if you wanted a high value apparel product, you'd probably want more lined fibers. So how can we convert that stem into those best fibers in a usable way that meets the spec for industry? So we need to know what that spec for industry is, and then we can do the R&D on it. And there's a load of ways to do decortication. I mean, some of them are, as I say, this hammer action. It's very mechanical. It's very heavy duty. But there's steam explosion, there's ultrasonics, and all sorts of ways to break apart those plant materials to make them available for particular end users. What is the most sustainable way to tincture, and why? Possibly honey. You guys in the natural health products would know better than I on some of the real techniques. At the moment, there's a lot of ethanol and solvent extraction. The CO2 is probably a lot cleaner than that. But it depends on what sort of end use you're doing, and of course, ice is pretty low energy. Well, apart from making the ice, way to do it, and can come up with some quite clean products. So it is a fat-based product rather than a water-based. So that's why solvents and things like butter or honey are good to suspend it in. If you wanted to keep your essential oils in a hemp seed oil, that would be a reasonable carrier as well. Well, that was much more. Just bear with me for a moment. How to ensure medical properties practices are maintained. If you're looking at the medical side, I mean, that is a well-regulated GMP, good manufacturing practices are applicable to make any medicine. You've got to have the clinical trials before you make a medical claim. These are all things that the medicinal cannabis community have to deal with. From industrial hemp's point of view, if you're not making a medical claim, then you're not saying you're a medicine, then it's a little easier because you can be a natural health product or a nutraceutical. That said, though, all of these facilities that are being produced and created and built by the medicinal cannabis companies hopefully will have a useful role to play in developing that wider wellness range of products, because we could use them as contract manufacturers, toll manufacturers, such that when we're trying to export our products into jurisdictions overseas that have a high level of compliance, they have very high thresholds of what is acceptable for their local consumers, them being made in a GMP facility is going to be a great boom. We're just going to position ourselves right at that high level. And that's going to lead to those niche markets really picking up on New Zealand hemp products. How can local communities benefit from the wealth created by the hemp industry? Well, that's on farm with employment. Admittedly, one person in a tractor can do an awful lot. But if you looked at the nutraceutical or that horticultural side, that would be individual plant husbandry. That's going to be a bigger employer. Puro is a good example of that. Currently in your region, and it's just going to be exciting to see what can happen on the farm. We need, as I've said, to go vertically integrated and go up that value chain rather than being a commodity. So there's all sorts of opportunities for more employment creation, opportunities for investors and entrepreneurs to build that primary processing and other facilities to manufacture products. And of course, then there's all the ancillary markets that are going to create employment in your local area as well. The people that are involved in this individual plant husbandry, they possibly will come from a background of growing cannabis, and they have a wealth of knowledge, and they'll become bug scientists and soil scientists and agronomic scientists and things like that. And as I say, those other supply chain needs would be met by the laboratories, by the accountants and banks, by the marketing people and things that are going to promote the products that are being made and grown locally. So they're all ways that this is a bulky raw material, so all those value adds have to be done close to where it's grown. And that means that regional development would, the implications of that would be really useful into the rural economies. And that's one of the catch cries, of course, for the government around why they want a hemp industry. Of course, housing is a big part of that, with healthy homes, food, healthy people, but also the regenerative and reinvigoration of rural New Zealand could really be moved along quicker if you had a diverse hemp industry that was requiring a lot of people to manufacture and use the product that's being grown locally. How can we move the hemp industry forward? We've touched on a few ways by supporting your local supplier of hemp seed food products and, the demand for wearing hemp clothes and things like that, and getting involved in that value chain, whether you be an investor or a new product development person, or it could be somebody on the farm. So, yeah, just get active, talk to your people about it, talk to your networks, let them know industrial hemp is a good thing to do, and lobby your local government to so they can see that there's political capital to gain by this. This climate emergency, this crisis is really quite obviously serious, and it was really reinforced for me in the Whangarei meeting how much we can offer that space, and we just need to get that message out there so those politicians have a bit more comfort to support the industry, and then maybe we'll find that champion. Back to the Christchurch manufacturer of the hemp insulation, that's New Zealand Natural Fibres. We have all the ingredients for a great product. Absolutely agree with that. So how do we move forward to get the process going? Should we get our licenses or via hemp producers, ourselves or via hemp producers? It depends if you've got access to the land, get a hemp license for yourself and start trialling industrial hemp to see how it goes in your environment. But how do we move it forward? We've got to work on that value chain. We've got to work together. We've got to work collaboratively in the sense that, the R&D community are really engaged with this product. So they're ready to do the work, and they just need industry dollars to fund it. So if we can get that industry dollar flow happening, we can make some really great gains. And a lot of that funding from the NZHIA's point of view at the moment in an emerging industry should go to that foundational knowledge, that pre-competitive type work that is going to benefit us all. And the great thing about that is if we can fund the industry component, we can leverage off things like the Sustainable Food and Fibre Futures Fund, SFFF, to get even more money to put into those locations. And that means that we can now get that R&D community really up to speed with using industrial hemp. So there's even more knowledge cumulatively being built by those research facilities at the universities, Crown Research Institutes and other independents that can really be of use for the wider picture later. And as we grow, then people will look at that R&D and say, okay, that's given me the information I need. I want to apply that. And now I'm going to get my funding for the development of a product that I want to use based on the information that we've all been privy to because we've all participated in the creation of it. How do we overcome government resistance to freeing up the regulations on hemp? That's a really good question in the sense that we haven't had a great deal of traction. We're struggling to find that champion within the government to really move it forward and make our industry heard. The industry is starting to come together, and if we can get that strategy done and show that we're a unified group with a shared sort of vision, even though everybody's going to have their own business plans and own IP protection and own confidentiality issues and things, there is some basic understandings that we could all agree on how we want to grow. And then if we can grow the industry and the rising tide lifts all boats, that sort of thing, then we've got this unified voice and the government can see that we're quite a cohesive industry, and then they'll have a lot more faith in supporting us. So it's about us working together, finding those champions, contacting the local MP, definitely making an election issue for next year. Would be a way to highlight these things. So all of these things are in place, but in process of being evolved, and we need the support of more members. So we have a little bit of funds to, we're the cart before the horse. You hear this chicken and egg scenario often in the hemp industry. We're not the wine industry with multi-million-dollar budgets and groups of lawyers in a head office in Auckland. We're volunteers at this stage. So, we do need a little bit more support, and one way of really helping and being kept in touch with all of these things that are being developed within the industry is, of course, to join. And we have a $25 individual member, a $25 sort of student supporting member, $50 individual, and $100 business. So it's pretty reasonable to get involved, and that'll keep you up to date with newsletters and such like. And the members section of the website has a lot of resources that are just being built upon. And all of this tour will create collateral that we'll use in that hemp portal to help people with their hemp journey. Right, so There was one other government resistance, right? With another one. I'm getting through them. And then there's this one, manufacturing process. Manufacturing process, yes, on the farm. The question has a silage cutter and a conventional, presumably combine. Yes, they can all be used. Some of them will need modifications. You've got to be a bit careful. I mean, it's a very tough fibre that will wrap around anything it can. If it does, and it's a hot day and there's dust and you get a spark, you will burn your combine down. That has happened, but a lot of other people have had really good experience with it. They've just gone slowly through it and really got their their harvesting technique done with conventional equipment. And that applies also to the seeding end, the beginning of the season. Just a conventional precision drill and other drills can handle the seeding. So the harvesting is available. Again, we need a lot of work around how to harvest, say, bigger stems or for that horticultural use. But that artificial intelligence and robotics, as they come into other horticultural industries, will eventually apply to us. But at the beginning, it'll be quite a manpower or people power approach. I'm just going to open up one here that's got half a dozen on it. So just bear with me. No, that didn't work. Okay. How can we get involved in growing? Well, we've discussed that a little bit with regard to getting a license. It's a 45-day work turnaround. 45 working days is the Ministry of Health's KPI. So if you get them done this year, you'll be able to do your trials. But talk to other local people as well. Some people have already had licenses and done trials. Learn from their experiences. You'll have to work out who you're going to, unless it's a trial that you're just using for your own knowledge. If you are going to do it commercially, find a buyer for your product, work out how you're going to harvest it, especially seed. It comes off moist with a moisture content of over 20%. If you don't get that dried within 2 hours from harvest, then you've got compost. And bitter seed makes a bitter product. So it's all about that quality and getting that moisture out as soon as you can from a seed harvest. So that would be my main tip for the seed producers, is to get onto that really quickly. Yes, there are some certified organic seed suppliers, not many. Most of it's grown spray-free, but if you send me an email and we'll try and put you in touch with some of those. You've got to watch your germination rate, because of course that will help you decide how much seed you're going to put into the ground. How can we do this without government and money? Remove greed, remove transport costs. The transport cost is going to be a big one. You know, that's where you want to add value. So you're only transporting high value products around the place. It doesn't, $511 for a license, and if you do an annual return every year, you can roll that license over for another 2 years. So that's 3 years out of one license. So it's not considerably expensive from that regard. That said, though, you would have to do a THC test, and that could be another $500 plus, just depending on where you go for there's 2 approved labs, one's Hills Labs and one's ESR. And if there's any locals out there that have had a license and had an adverse THC result, please get in touch, because this issue around how they're now testing and these, we're seeing these adverse test results that we hadn't seen in the past. So there's something not right there, and we need to get to the bottom of it and understand what's going on with that, because this 0.35% might have to be raised to 1% to accommodate the way they're doing the testing, including THC and THCA, which is now a requirement post the food law change in 2018. What natural resin is available in New Zealand to add to the concrete? That's a great example. It's more to do, the hempcrete is more to do with a lime binder. So there's a lot of R&D around that required. Also about the certification of those products. When you're talking about resin, you might be thinking of the formaldehyde used in medium density fiber boards. If it is that case, then yes, we need some. Can we use the lignans and things from the plant itself and extract them and put them back in and bind it? That hemp wood example I showed you in the slides, that's made with a soya protein resin. So that's a pretty sustainable way to do it. Those soy products aren't available in New Zealand, but they're definitely of interest to people like Scion and things like that. Okay, hopefully that helped answer some of the questions. There's a couple left to do, but I've just had the text saying to wrap it up. So thank you very much, everybody, for your attention, and I hope that was of interest and use. As I say, great opportunity to join the association, to keep in touch, form a local group even, and see what comes out of this hui to really move things forward in your local area. But keep telling and talking about it around the barbecues, and we'll get there because it's a good news story. Thank you very much.